UCF loses their fourth straight, and their tourney hopes are all but dead.
You are Locked On UCF, your daily podcast on the UCF Knights, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
In the Locked On UCF, your daily UCF podcast. I'm your host, Mike G, and thank you so much for making Locked On UCF your first listen every day. Joining me as he does every single week is my good friend, Andrew Gluco from The Last Word on Sports. First word on this topic, Andrew, tough loss to Baylor. Feels like every week we come on this podcast, on this YouTube show, and we say, this is a must win, and then they lose. 4 straight losses for the UCF Knights on the hardwood. In a game that, quite frankly, it's the same story night in and night out. Baylor got 40 points from their bench in this one. UCF only 14 points from their bench in a game that they lost ultimately by 15 points. I'm at a loss for words, my friend, here. This is a talented team at the one deep, but just nothing going on behind the starters.
And this was a game of missed opportunity. Both teams were so cold starting this game. UCF was 6 of 20 from the field. Baylor was 7 of 20 from the field to start this game. I mean, it was just cold, and just really ugly basketball early on. I mean, it was just not fun to watch. Just from us, if you're a fan of the game, you would hate this game because it was just ugly. This was just bad basketball. And then, both teams started to warm up a little bit. You get in the early second half, it's 48-43, Baylor's winning, and then UCF misses 8 of their next 9 shots. And then before you know it, it's a 21-point game. This game blew wide open. After that, in the early second half, UCF just could not come back, and nothing they could do. Again, we come back to the same problems over and over again. UCF not moving the ball particularly well. They're beaten out on assists, 20-11. For a while, it was like 10-1 at one point in the first half. This was a team that just wasn't moving the ball around. I think that was part of their problem, and it's been their problem. Where you would expect someone to be a field general on this court, and you're not seeing it. You're seeing a lot of single, isolated ball handling, just not good passing and movement of the ball, and as a result, not good shooting.
Yeah, I think that's reflected in the only 11 assists on the night versus 20 for Baylor. Some other stats in this one. UCF shot 44% from the field versus 53% for Baylor. Baylor shot 60% in the second half, Andrew. UCF 8 of 20 from 3-point range, 8 of 25 for the Baylor Bears. 89% from the free throw line versus 86 for Baylor. Turnovers were fairly even, 12 turnovers for UCF, 10 for Baylor. And both teams scored 16 points off those turnovers, 29 rebounds to 28 rebounds. The stat that just sticks out to me is bench points. You're just not a deep team if you're UCF. Now, Keyshawn Hall had to what I would think is another efficient night, 5 of 5 from the free throw line, 7 of 11 from the field, 19 points. Only 2 turnovers and 8 rebounds. So he did the job. Now, it was a little bit of a tough shooting night, 4 of 14 for Ivy Curry. Yikes, man. 1 of 7 from 3-point range. He hits a few of those. Maybe this looks a little bit different down the stretch, but ultimately, you're depending on everybody in your starting lineup to have a perfect night, or you can't win.
You can't. And here's the thing: UCF got hot late in the game. I mean, they went 9 of 14 to close out the game, the last 10 minutes. But I mean, too little, too late. The game was a 21-point, Baylor lead at that point. They were able to chip away a little bit, but UCF's defense once again, dropped the ball. They're just giving up points left and right. We talked about what they need to do and where they can go, and just we're almost sounding like broken records at this point, where we're saying the same things over and over again and nothing changes. I mean, isn't that the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. We're getting the same results here. This is a team that's just not playing good defense. They're giving up a lot of shots. Teams are scoring above their scoring average on a growingly consistent basis. And this is a team that's postseason hopes continue to fade further and further away.
Yeah, agreed. Look, we talked about on the last basketball segment, you got to string together wins, multiple wins in a row. And you've got to start somewhere. You're on a 4-game losing streak. And now you got Iowa State coming. We're going to talk about that in the next segment. But your chance to string together wins before you ran into Iowa State and have some momentum going in that game, it's gone. Now you got to go beat a top 10 team to try to score another quad one. But it seems like a really undoable task at this point for Johnny Dawkins' squad. Look, ultimately, this comes down to building depth through recruiting, and it's going to take time. And it's going to take experience. And if you're UCF, you got to hold on to the talent that you have. You got to recruit new talent. You maybe got to go find some studs in the portal, and you've got to try to continue to build this thing. But right now, Andrew, they're just not there. And I think it's evident in the results. But hey, Iowa State is coming up. Before we move on, last words on this Baylor game, man. It was a tough watch.
It was, and we've talked about how UCF has to win one of these games. They're winning the ones they're losing the games they should be winning. The Baylor one was kind of a toss-up. They were a top 30 net team, would have been a great quad one game for them. But losing those other two at home is just absolutely stings. And then you've got the hardest game left on your schedule. Iowa State, real tough team, one of the best in the country. They're not ranked top 10 for nothing. What do you do here? That's the real question. Like, what mentality do you go into this?
Yeah. I don't know that we have a solid answer to that question at this point, but that's what Johnny Dawkins gets paid big bucks to do. So we're going to talk about what mentality they take into Iowa State after a quick word from our sponsor. Here we go. This episode of Locked On UCF is brought to you by our friends at Wayfair, Andrew. After the holiday hustle, there's nothing like giving your home a little TLC, and I always find that decluttering and refreshing my space helps me get back into a good routine. Did you do any furniture shopping this holiday season?
No. No.
Well, whether you're tidying up or clearing out, or you just want to give your space a new look to start the year, Wayfair has everything you need, all within your budget. Give your home the refresh it needs with Wayfair. Head to wayfair.com right now. That's wayfair.com. Wayfair, every style, every home. Next up is Iowa State, part 2. Now, this would have been a compelling storyline had UCF found some wins, but right now seems like a pretty insurmountable task trying to take down the Cyclones. If you're Johnny Dawkins, what's your message to your team going into this game, right? Like, is it play this one like it's our last? Is it, hey, we can beat these guys? What do you say to your team to get them motivated headed into a matchup with a top 10 team when your season is all but down the drain?
Well, at this point do you want to be viewed as losers, or do you want to go shock the world?
Okay.
Go shock the world. If I'm Johnny Dawkins, I'm in there. We've already proven that we can play with anybody. You took Houston to the wire. You took Kansas to the wire. The two of the best teams in the country. So, you already know what you can do. Just loosen up, have fun out there. Don't be a hero, and just have some fun out there. Find the bright spot in basketball again, and just hang on to that, and go shock the world.
Yeah. It may not amount to a hill of beans, but I think at this point, right, like you're telling your team, upsets happen every day, and we can go out and we can play our butts off and we can execute at a high level. And when we execute our game plan and we hit shots and we play the way we know we can play, we've got a chance. And all you need down the stretch is a chance. It's college basketball is one of the most exciting postseasons in any sport for this reason, because when you put any two basketball teams, Andrew, on a court on any given day, you never know who might come out on top. And I talked about Keyshawn Hall, and I want to go back to him because he's having a career season. Keyshawn Hall is having an absolute career season, and it's getting overshadowed, I think, in kind of the failures in the win-loss column. But, man, he has starred for Johnny Dawkins so far this year.
Oh, absolutely. You look at his history, and this is by far his best season. He was really good for George Mason last year, averaged over 16 points a game. Now he's averaging over 18 points a game for UCF, a much tougher conference. You're comparing the Atlantic 10 versus the Big 12, and he's risen up to the challenge. We've seen flaws in his game, though. We've definitely seen flaws in this game where he sometimes forces it too much and will play, again, hero ball. At times when you really need to step back and move the ball around. You have to be able to play without the ball in your hands. And not every player can do that. So we do see some good out of Keyshawn Hall, but we have seen some flaws out of Hall as well that, Dawkins may not be able to fix. But if he wants to move on to the next level of his career, he's going to have to learn how to handle, being a supporting role player at times. There are times where you push and there's times when you don't. And not every player knows that, as they're growing up, they learn it over time. This is something that Hall's got to still pick up. And it's not too late. But that has played a role in what's happened with this team where the assist numbers are just down across the board. It's because people aren't passing the ball, doing a lot of isolation play, and Hall is a big piece of that. He averages 2.5 assists a game for UCF, which is a career high for him. But if no one else is passing the ball, which is unfortunately kind of the case. I mean, your point guards just aren't moving the ball. Sometimes being the star also means moving the ball. It's kind of the LeBron James effect where you sometimes have to. You may score a lot. You may want to be best shooters on your team, but you also have to be willing to facilitate others that may have a better chance. Because there are times Hall's getting double teamed because he becomes the focal point of that offense. The only guy who's really moving the ball. At that point, you have to recognize that you're being double teamed, get your other your players involved, and give them opportunities to score. By drawing coverage away from them, create that extra pass, create that open shot in the corner, and then it falls to those players to make those shots. But if they're not getting good looks because they're just pushing the ball too much, it doesn't matter what else you're going to where the other players are. You're going to be missing more shots than you make.
It's always amazing in seasons like this where, again, his personal accomplishments are being overshadowed by the team failures. But look, he's the second leading scorer in the Big 12 at 18.3 points per game. And you would never know it the way UCF is losing games. You've got the second leading scorer in the conference on your team. And I think that's remarkable. I think it speaks to the talent that exists here. He's getting tough buckets. He's had a few off nights here and there, but for the most part, he's been a consistent staple for Johnny Dawkins, coming out, giving you a safe floor for scoring, at least for some of the game. And, when he's having an off night, where do you go for points? Well, sometimes, when Ivy Curry's hitting, shots, he shows up. Mustafa Cham, same thing, versus Baylor, 7 of 10 from the field, 18 points. So he showed up in that game. But where else are points coming from in this one? Darius Johnson scored 12 points, but 7 of those points were free throws, man. He was 2 of 7 from the field. I mean, him and Ivy Curry combined were 6 of 21. That's rough for your starters if you're UCF.
And not only is it rough, but it's also when you're scoring too. UCF got hot, at the end of the game, last 10 minutes of the game, they're already down 21, but they were so cold going into that, at that point, the game was over. So yeah, you're going to look for others to get in there and try to make some plays. Jordan Ivy Curry obviously had a really rough game, but you can't afford to fall down 18, 20 points and expect to be competitive. You know, we're seeing the postseason opportunities just fade and fade and fade, and it looks like they're not doing much about it.
Yeah, no, teams that are not deep cannot play from behind, period, because you're going to have to go to your bench to spell your starters at some point. And if you can't score when you put the bench players in, you're going to fall behind. Or if you leave your starters in, they're going to run out of gas at the end of the game unless they're just having one of those special nights where they can't miss. I think that is the conundrum that UCF has this year, lacking depth. But hey, what does it do to their tournament chances? We kind of said it earlier in the segment. Is it really dead? There's still a chance. If you're telling me there's a chance, there's still an outside chance. We're going to talk about what that chance is right after the break. Win the Big 12 tournament. That's the chance. Win the Big 12. Go on an epic run in the Big 12 tournament. Get the auto qualifier. Wreck some poor team season on the bubble. Bump them out. Get in there. I think that's the only shot that UCF has to see the big dance this year. And that's the situation that they find themselves in. Now, look, I know it's a long shot, but hear me out.
What?
Follow me to fantasy land for just a second here. I'm gonna give you some over the top homerism here for a second. When you play early, I think you get a chance to go on a run. You get a chance to go in to the quarterfinals hot, whereas those teams who get those buys in the first few days may be a little cold. And if you come out and you hit them with some shock and awe, maybe you can get up and hold on for dear life and find your way to the Big 12 final, where, again, it's going to take a really, really special run. But we've seen it happen before in these major conferences. I think UCF definitely has some of the tools to make it, albeit, I wouldn't bet my 401k on it, but there's a chance.
I mean, it's funny. You look at the bracket matrix, and out of all the brackets out there that are currently on the matrix that are updated, which is currently 80, they're in the dance in 2 of them. However, they are either in the first 4 out or the next 4 out, and quite a number of them. So, I mean, they're not out of the conversation, but
all right.
I mean, they need help. You win against Iowa State and get some assistance from an Arkansas losing or a Wake Forest, maybe Vanderbilt falls or something. You got Nebraska that's barely in there. I mean, if one of these teams, and there's other teams, if one of them stumbles a few times, as they go down the stretch, UCF wins against Iowa State, gets that huge quad one, basically wins out against the scrubs, and then against West Virginia, which is a legit game to close out the season. I mean, they could claw their way, but they can't do it on their own. They're not in control of their destiny.
Yeah.
Other than just win all the games, because they can win out and still not make it at this time. Any goodwill that they've built up as a result of their quad one wins, which are now 3-7, but you're 0-3 in quad 2. So I mean that just burns any goodwill out.
That's tough.
They're not going to have a winning season in conference play. Surprisingly, they're still floating around. They're 72 in the net. I mean, they're hanging in there, which is surprising. You look at the fact that they just keep dropping games. But I want to flip it a little bit and talk about Iowa State for just a second. Something that we didn't mention going into this game. We've talked about the term and everything. Iowa State's lost 3 of their last 4 games. They beat TCU handily the other day, but they lost against Arizona. They lost against Kansas State at home. That's a big loss. And then Kansas on the road. So this team is mortal. The key is cover the guards. They got that killer tandem that ate UCF alive the last time they met. You got to find a way to bring in a little bit of defense, which is, I mean, this is so surprising that a Johnny Dawkins UCF squad has no defense. And that was the bread and butter for years and did not have it. I mean, there's still a chance, but they got to dig and find a different brand of themselves. This team is soft when it comes to their defensive play. They are just downright soft, and they got to toughen up. They've got to play smarter, and they got to take advantage of opportunities on the offensive side. You can't shoot like you do against Baylor. But again, Iowa State is mortal. 3 out of the last 4. UCF can do it. But will they?
Yeah.
I'm not so sure. I don't know if this team can find that defensive lockdown that they had in the beginning of the season. It's like they've lost track of who they are.
Well, it's interesting when you look at the schedule. They've not won a single game where they've given up 90 points. So if you give up 90 points, you lose. And
I mean, if you give up 90 points, you shouldn't win.
Yeah, right. You give up 90 points, you lose. And you saw some. I mean, it was close in the win versus Arizona State. They gave up 89 points, but for the most part, when you look at the other wins, they held teams in the 60s, in the 70s, in the 50s, right? And so because you lack depth, you've got to play defense at a high level, and you've got to keep the other team off the boards. You can't give up offensive rebounds. You can't give second chance points to teams when you lack depth. And that's what UCF has been doing. So, like I said, it's going to be interesting to see, I think, where they land up. If they pull out a miracle win versus Iowa State, and make no mistake, it would be a miracle. Now, you talked about the schedule, and I can't help but think about the missed opportunity versus Kansas. I can't help but think about the missed opportunity versus Houston, right? And where you get one of those games, we're having a very, very different conversation here today, Andrew. You're talking about 4-point loss at Kansas, a 1-point loss at Houston. They had to find one, and they couldn't. Now, I do want to highlight again something you said earlier for our listeners. 0-3 in quad 2 is painful. Right? Like, you got a few quad 1 wins, but if you win those quad 2 games, if you go 3-0 in quad 2s, you're in a good position to make the tournament. You're well inside. You're not even on the bubble if you win those quad 2 games in my mind.
Well, I mean, you certainly would be on the outside looking in. I mean, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Again, we talked about that BYU game, that Cincinnati game. Those were winnable games that they just fell on their face. And those are the type of games that knock you out of the tournament. That BYU one, and now the Cougars were hot at the time. That put BYU in the field, and it took UCF out of the field. And they haven't, they have not been able to stop the hemorrhaging. But you know what? As you said, once you get towards conference tourney season, you're back in control of your destiny at that point. You just, win and in, just survive and advance. And it's not going to be easy coming from one of the bottom seeds. You got an extra game that others don't have. But, if they're able to find a way on back-to-back games to disrupt their opponents and catch fire. I mean, they can play with anybody. I don't think they're going to win the conference tournament. I just think there's not enough depth.
Yeah.
But you know what? At that point, you're playing to parlay what you do into another tournament elsewhere. The NIT, the college basketball crown, something. I mean, UCF is going to have some basketball in March. It's just they would need a miracle to be the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, I agree with you. Great conversation, Andrew, about UCF basketball today. Before we get out of here, tell people where they can find you.
Well, you can catch me on Twitter /X or Blue Sky at StatBoyDrew, and you can catch my writing on The Last Word on College Football, the part of The Last Word on Sports Family.
Guys, that's it for another great edition of Locked On UCF. Thank you for making Locked On UCF your first listen of every day. For your second listen, go check out our friends at Locked On Big 12. Our guy Drake Told leads the conversation in conference realignment news and pulls no punches when it comes to talking about every team in the Big 12, including the UCF Knights. You can find Locked On Big 12 on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, and you can find us here tomorrow on Locked On UCF.